Hey there, welcome to another edition of Comic Book Geezers. I am your host, Pete, and along with my co-host...
I'm Wild Bill, the Unknown Comic. How are you? Thanks for joining us again today. We've got a special episode.
Very special.
It's going to be a long, drawn-out special episode. Maybe 3 to 5 episodes. We're going to do Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man by Stan Lee. And as you may know, Stan Lee created Spider-Man in the early 1962, I believe, and the idea was squashed and kicked to the curb. The top brass didn't like the idea. They're like, Stan, people don't like
people.
Yeah, people don't like spiders. Stan, no one's going to want to read that story. So he stuck to his guns, held his dream, kept on to it, and then about within a year, there was a comic called Amazing Fantasy, and top brass said, you know, we're going to cancel this comic called Amazing Fantasy. Why don't you go ahead and write that Spider-Man story, Stan, that you told us about? And he wrote it, and this is the first appearance of Spider-Man in the history of comic books. This is obviously a reprint, not the original.
Not worth any money.
But it's worth a good read if you love Spider-Man.
That is true.
So this book was hot. It sold like hotcakes, and then the top brass, when they looked at the cash register and saw how popular it was, they were like, you know what, Stan, you're right. It does deserve his own comic. So moving right along, this is a reprint of the first Amazing Spider-Man. And what, typical fashion, what do? They lace the Fantastic Four into the story, I guess, to help boost with the popularity because of Fantastic.
They were huge at the time, yeah.
And Stan created them. That was his first big hit. So this is actually printed in 1993. It's called a Marvel Milestone edition up here.
And
got the Chameleon. One of the major villains against Spider-Man.
Especially early on.
So we're doing a pre-100 episode today of just Spider-Man, all issues below 100. And
yeah, we're kind of breaking it down because there's just so much good stuff. So we're doing like 1 to 100, and again, we don't necessarily have all these issues, and we only just picked out like, we're going to do about 30 each episode. Then we're going to do like, 101 to 199 or 200, and then
we'll maybe do one from 201 to 300. I stopped collecting Spider-Man at issue 300. As I mentioned before, when I was younger, things were changing in the 80s. I was stuck in the bubble of comics from the 60s and 70s.
Nothing wrong with that.
And, I didn't like the changes that were going on, and things were lacking. And for me personally, and I was at a point in my life where I'd been collecting since from the time I was 13 till I was 30. So it was like time to take a break. But all these comics that we're showing you are Pete's comics, with the exception of the ones
in this episode, yeah.
Correct. Except for the issue number 1 reprint I just showed you. That's mine. I only have like 3 issues out of this whole stack. So I'm going to kick it over to Pete and let him show you what he's got here and bask in the awe of this historic character.
If you're a Spider, and even though Bill doesn't have a good majority of these, this is the stuff that he really wants. This is the stuff that most people really want. And up until, I've had a handful of these over the years since I was a kid, but it's really in the last year that I kind of set out to say, hey, I'm going to get as much of these vintage.
Exploded with the acquisition.
So this is the oldest one that I have, okay? This is number 19.
And what was the oldest issue you had when you started collecting? Do you remember? Like in the 70s?
Yeah, in fact,
for me, it was in the 170s.
The 60s, actually.
I think 176 was the first Spider-Man I bought. So when I was backtracking and buying back issues, I was buying the 150s, the 160s, the 140s, the 130s, the 120. I was going sequentially backwards. But I never made it to 100.
My two oldest originally, when I was a kid, was, I believe, the second in the 60s, the second issue with Mysterio, and then the one with the Kingpin, which actually you're going to see. I'm going to show you a little bit later. And I still have those original issues.
So this here is Pete's oldest Spider-Man
My
in his
oldest
collection.
one that I have right now. So it's number 19. So you got the Sandman, the Human Torch, and the Evil Enforcers. So you see there's Mr. Whip.
Here, show them, they can't see.
Yeah, he's all the way down at the bottom there. Not the
primitive drawings.
Yes, Steve Ditko.
Yeah. But still, a great artwork on Spider-Man. I like the way Sandman is kind of flimsy looking. It doesn't look very strong. The Human Torch looks a little weak, even the way he's drawn,
So the first, I think, 37 issues of Spider-Man were drawn by Steve Ditko. So it was basically Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's baby for the most part. And Steve has a very distinctive style, and he was that guy for Spider-Man early on. So here you have issue, 23?
23, I believe, yes.
So the Goblin and the Gangster.
Green Goblin.
So this, actually, I believe, was the second or third appearance of the Green Goblin, because he appeared very early on. But at this point in time, Spider-Man still did not know who the Green Goblin was. Nobody did. They had not revealed his identity yet. So
this one I picked out because we looked through Pete's collection before we shot this, and it's like, we got to get Kraven the Hunter in here. And we think is the second appearance of Kraven.
Yep.
A monumental villain. Kraven was big in the Spider-Man original cartoon series from the 60s. So Kraven is a character that I'm surprised that Hollywood hasn't tried to tackle yet.
I was just going to say that.
You were just going to say, see, we're good friends. We think alike.
Because, I mean, to me, it's like an obvious villain situation.
Yeah, he is. And it's not hard because he doesn't have superpowers. Right. He's just a super hunter. Yeah. Now, this one I like also because this is a Molten Man, which is also a classic villain. And that's one of the things about Spider-Man is he has the most amazing villains out of any character. Like, he's got such a wide variety, and they're all likable, even though they're villains. They make him a better character. And Molten Man is quite a unique villain as well.
And Stan Lee really wrote these characters so well to the point that you knew these, even though they're villains, you knew them. In fact, in my opinion, Spider-Man villains, the Spider-Man Rogue Gallery, is probably second in all of comics, only to Batman's. That's my opinion.
And I mean, and these villains sometimes bounce around to other magazines, like the Rhino here, for example. Again,
the Hulk.
Yes, the Hulk. Is this a second appearance again?
Second appearance
of the Rhino. Now, this book is issue number 43, so it's within the first. Spider-Man's not even 4 years old yet, so this is probably 1965, right? Because we started in '62. So somewhere, and this is a December book, so it's probably December of '65.
Yep.
Moving right along, another classic villain from the Spider-Man saga.
One of my favorites.
The Lizard.
Yeah.
And Dr. Connors, who Peter Parker knows. And this guy is kind of like a Jekyll and Hyde story. Just a little twisted with a reptilian twist to it.
Brilliant scientist who comes up with this formula, changes himself into that, and in a lot of cases he doesn't remember.
He blacks out when he becomes the Lizard, and he's completely the opposite of the nice Dr. Connors. He's a menace.
It's a 2-issue storyline there.
Yes, here's the second part.
Great cover.
I'll bring it back up. When you have two stories together, and they're both really, really good covers. So we couldn't decide which one. So I said, why don't we do them both? Let's get them out there. Show the fans. This is another one, another classic cult. The team up here, the Vulture and Kraven, going against Spider-Man. And I believe this is issue 49. So we haven't even hit issue 50 yet. But Pete, he doesn't have 50.
But I think I do. We just didn't.
Did we not pull it out?
Yeah, we didn't pull it out, I guess.
There's nothing monumental for a 50th issue. They didn't do a big deal about it. This we like because it's the ultimate antagonist against Spider-Man is Peter Parker's boss, J. Jonah Jameson. What could be worse than the two of them being strapped together to some kind of death doomsday device, It's like, I hate you, Spider-Man, but it's even worse, I gotta die with you.
Yeah, exactly.
So definitely a good read. Moving right along.
And the first appearance of Joe Robertson, the editor.
Who was always a pro Spider-Man guy. Like, hey, J. Jonah Jameson, why you blacklisting Spider-Man? He's not all that bad. And
mind your business and do your job, Robertson. You're
not the editor of this paper. You're not the publisher. You just print what I tell you to write.
That's right.
We've talked about Dr. Octopus in the past as classic villains. And the love triangle between Peter Parker and the love for his Aunt May, and then Dr. Octopus getting involved with Aunt May, and she thinks he's a sweet man, and she has no idea what.
Meanwhile, he's got plans. There's a reason why he's attaching himself to Aunt May, which gets revealed a little bit later on, and we'll talk more about it.
Though,
This is actually, I believe, is the first or maybe second of like a 4-part storyline that sees like Doc Ock kind of take possession of Spider-Man, and Spider-Man actually joins up with him. He gets amnesia. Very, very cool storyline.
Also in through the 130s and somewhere in the 160s, the love relationship again with Dr. Octopus resurfaces with him and Aunt May.
Yep.
This is another great one. J. Jonah Jameson in this monster suit here, this robot suit. Now he can take the law into his own hands, matters into his own hands, and crush Spider-Man himself. Who is it, Dr. Smythe?
Yeah, he hooks up with this guy, Professor Smythe, who's a nut job, right? But he's an inventor, and he makes all these robots. So this is like the second of, I think, 4 times that Jonah winds up going to him and say, "You got to build me a robot that I can
catch
kill
this Spider-Man menace, this wall-crawling menace." Wall-crawling menace was his favorite.
And in fact,
term.
Bill mentioned the '60s cartoon, right? So this, actually not this particular one, but the first, which I don't have, or maybe I do, I can't remember, but the first ever appearance of one of Smythe's robots actually was made into one of the television shows in the '60s cartoon.
Okay. Now, going back to another classic villain of Spider-Man, the Kingpin. And this is a great cover. Because the Kingpin looks like a big fat guy, but he's all muscle.
All muscle and very fast.
Yeah. And so when he gets a hold of Spider-Man, Spider-Man's like, whoa, look how he's swinging around like a baseball bat. Like there's nothing to him. This is issue 60. So it's a monumental issue heading towards that 5th year of being in circulation. Mysterio, another great villain that I love from Spider-Man.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't really know of Mysterio floating around and fighting other heroes. I think he pretty much just goes against Spider-Man, to the best of my knowledge.
I think you are correct.
I could be wrong, I'm human, but I've never seen, in all my years of collecting comics, I haven't seen Mysterio fight anybody else.
And one of the most unique villains.
Yeah, Master of Illusion.
Yeah.
All about trickery.
And just look at that look. I mean, that's
this is a great costume.
Yeah.
And we'll be showing you other Mysterio issues in another episode when we get to Post 100, because I have some good Mysterio comics. A great villain. You don't see him too often. This one is also cool that Pete has against Quicksilver, who is like Marvel Comics' version of the Flash.
Yep.
And he was an Avenger, I believe, Quicksilver.
Yeah, at the time he was an Avenger. I mean, of course, he's also a mutant, so he was also part of the X-Men. But at the time, he was an Avenger, and this issue is one of those instances of Quicksilver just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So he thinks that what he's seeing is actually not what is happening. So he's going after Spider-Man because he hears. This is a time, and a lot of you may remember, where Spider-Man and the law were not necessarily seeing eye to eye.
Yeah, he was viewed as a vigilante.
Yeah, so Quicksilver was listening to the cops. They're like, "Oh, got to get him." So
yeah, he's a bad guy.
Yeah,
why does he wear a mask? You know, that kind of thing. You're up to no good. This is another great one for Pete's collection. Something with the Shocker.
Yeah, another good villain.
This is what, issue 75? 72, right? This concludes 6 years of in public circulation. 72 issues, 6 years. A great cover. And the Shocker's a great villain. I don't have many issues in my collection of the Shocker. I think I only have 1 or 2. But that's a great cover. Another thing Marvel did, after the popularity of Spider-Man, they did king-size specials and annuals, and this is from my collection. This is actually the oldest Spider-Man in my collection. This is from 1968. This is king-size special number 5, and I picked this up in the late 80s, early 90s for a couple bucks, which was cheap, and it was the oldest Spider-Man in my collection, and it's twice as thick as a regular comic as a king-size special.
This is in much better condition than mine.
Pete has one also. This is a little bit more beat up.
Yeah, it's really beat up.
So I'm happy and proud to have that. It still doesn't compare to Pete's collection. I'll let Pete take over with the show and tell here.
Okay.
This is issue 73.
Man Mountain Marco, the big brute.
And he used to report to a guy called Silvermane, who was like a mob boss.
Yep. Who kind of wanted to discover like kind of the fountain of youth, right? So he comes up with this formula that,
it's kind of like a Jekyll and Hyde
50
story.
years off his life, yeah.
The Silvermane in the later comics you see is white hair, pure white hair. But he still has his faculties about him, his wits about him, and he's a ruthless mob boss villain. And then issue 76.
The Return of the Lizard.
Another lizard. The lizard lives,
The Lizard was always good for popping up like every, 15, 20 issues or so, because, Peter Parker and Spider-Man were both very good friends with Dr. Connors. So it's like, he was always kind of a part of the Spider-Man storylines every so often. And,
Post 100, not so much.
Not as much.
Between 100 and 200, I don't think I have any Lizard issues that I can think of off the top of my head.
Early on, he was
very popular. And the Human Torch.
This is actually a great issue because, Spidey is trying to capture the Lizard
on his own terms,
right? Because he's really afraid of the well-being of Dr. Connor. But meanwhile, Human Torch, who these two never get along, and he just comes. All he wants to do is kill and not kill, but he wants to get the Lizard under control, and he doesn't care if he hurts him. And meanwhile, Spider-Man does not want to hurt him.
And Spider-Man is trying to protect the Lizard's identity.
Yeah, yeah.
So he's not letting the Human Torch know, hey, this is really a good guy. He's a friend of mine, you know. So he's protecting the Lizard, his identity, and from physical harm. Yeah. So he actually goes into combat with the Human Torch to say, lay off the Lizard.
Because he promised Dr. Connor's wife that he wouldn't get
and he has a son also.
Yeah.
And so he was like, trying to protect the family's interests as well. You know, they're.
But the Torch and Spidey are both teenagers, basically. So it's like
it's a good issue.
Yeah, it really is.
This is another interesting book because this is another interesting villain of the Chameleon. Definitely like master of disguise, and has a way of manipulating people into thinking that Peter Parker, Spider-Man is no good, and it's unusual because this is an older issue. I have some issues of the Chameleon where he fights Iron Man, and his costume has changed over this. So this is like predates what I have. So this is classic.
A lot of people think of the Chameleon. He's really the original Spider-Man villain, but really didn't pop up that much.
Well, we saw him in issue 1, and now we're up to what? We're up to issue 80.
He may have shown up one other time early on, but that's really about it. He was not a very prolific villain.
This is an amazing. This is my favorite Spider-Man villain of all, Electro. And again, in my post 100 collection, there's not a lot of. I only have one issue of Electro. And so as big as he was more popular in
first 15 issues.
Pre-100, yeah.
Yeah, especially really
issue number 6 is the first appearance of Electro. But this is a beautiful story because this takes place in a TV studio.
Yeah.
And, I think it was Spider-Man was being interviewed?
Yes.
And then Electro shows up and all mayhem ensues. Yep. And quiet on the set. It wasn't in the script. But a great issue.
Kingpin again, there he is.
What number are we? This is 84. Number 84.
This is actually one of the best knockdown, drag-out slugfest between these two guys. It's literally almost the entire comic is the two of them battling it out, mano a mano. It's
it looks like Kingpin's pulling some kind of tablecloth.
Yep.
and just pulled the rug out from under Spidey's feet. Technically, that's what this cover looks like to me. He pulled the rug out from under his feet. As Spider-Man's all up in the air and stuff, but we know he's like a cat. He'll land back on his feet.
All action inside.
This is another great one I had to have Pete pull out.
Yeah.
Very
early on in the Black Widow.
The Black Widow. And if you watch our Daredevil episode, we know that she was a popular love interest with Matt Murdock. But this is one of the first appearances of her in Spider-Man.
I think the first, yeah.
Okay.
And actually, in most of this issue, she has her original costume, which probably a lot of you haven't seen, and she actually goes and switches to the costume that we knew her.
Which is the black costume.
The black costume, yeah.
So
but she had like this blue thing.
So here's just a shadow.
Yep.
And as if, mystery lady, who is this? And that's another subtle technique that they do to kind of draw you in and get your interest out. If you've been reading Spider-Man up until this point, who is that? That's a great cover. I love the pose.
Yep.
I think it's very well done. And for the age of this book, it's in beautiful shape.
There's actually a later issue, post 100, where Spidey's on the wall and you see the shadow of the Vulture coming. I think you know which one. This Spider Sense.
128.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think that's in my pick too for our next episode. This is a nice cover. What I like about this cover is it focuses on all the mayhem in his life. And one of the greatest things about the Spider-Man characters is this guy did not have a perfect life. You would think that having a superpower, everything's going to be great. But he has so many things going wrong in his life. And this cover kind of exemplifies that. His problems with his friends and his close-knit circle of people that are part of his life. And he can't tell him he's Spider-Man. So I think this cover really
he's finding it very difficult to lead his life with what he's got going on, under the mask.
Unmasked at last, and what is it going to be like if he tells all these people, yeah, I'm Spider-Man? They probably hate him for all the negative publicity in the news.
Yeah.
Again, another classic villain, revisited, Dr. Octopus. Great cover. It's like a 3-in-1 kind of cover. 3 different action pits.
So what do you think? The ultimate Spider-Man villain, is the Green Goblin or is it Doc Ock?
I'm going to have to go with the Green Goblin, I think.
Yeah.
But they're both notorious,
Yeah.
It's amazing that the two of them never teamed up to go against him.
I know.
that's something to think about.
You sometimes wonder if it wasn't for issue 121 and 122, would it have been Doc Ock who would have been that number one villain? You know what I'm saying?
I think he was the next in line, and the third in line would have been the Kingpin, I would think, right? And then fourth could have been Electro.
Vulture or Electro, or Craven,
But yeah, the Green Goblin, I think, has to be the number one villain because, like we just said, they pitted him against Gwen Stacy. Now, here's an issue with the Iceman, another X-Men, another mutant.
That's a good one.
Coming against Spider-Man. This one I'd like to borrow and read sometime. This one looks really good, man.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Is that Gwen Stacy in his hands?
It is.
See? And now, Gwen Stacy, just so you know, Gwen Stacy hates Spider-Man because a little bit later on in these issues, her father's a police captain and he dies. And Spider-Man's there on his deathbed, and they're talking to each other. And he's trying to find out who
gets blamed.
He gets blamed for the murder. Of course, he's just trying to find out who did this to you. Spider-Man's trying to find out from Captain Stacy, who did this to you. The daughter walks in and sees Spider-Man stand over her dead father and blames Spider-Man for the death of her father. Hates him, but yet her boyfriend is Peter Parker.
Yeah.
So she loves and hates the same man and doesn't know it. So there is a great, what do you call it? A great, is it a paradox?
Yeah.
Is that the right word to use? Yeah. Where, you got the good and the bad, and it's just a constant cyclone of mayhem in terms of emotions. And
the events leading up to this issue is that she's starting to be a little
suspicious
of Peter. So what he does here as Spider-Man is he tries to make it seem like, based on what I'm going to do here, there's no way she's ever going to think that Peter Parker and Spider-Man are one and the same, but he can't go through with his plan because Bobby Drake as Iceman shows up, so it kind of throws it all the whack. So.
And that's always the case where the Prowler, another great Spider-Man villain. I don't think this guy jumped around and fought other heroes.
No, and we didn't see enough of him. I thought he was a very cool villain.
You said they killed him off, right?
Yeah, I believe the first Prowler gets killed off, and then the second he's a relative. Yeah.
Okay. Great artwork. I do have some Marvel Tales, which are reprints in the 70s of these books from the 60s, and I have this, and they basically reprint the cover as well. They might alter them just a little bit, but I have the Marvel Tales version of this. But this is one of the most outstanding covers of the pre-100s.
And it's
issue 93.
Johnny Romita.
Now we're going to go to issue 96.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these next three. So, again,
you'll notice. I'll just give you an example.
Yeah, something's missing on the.
Every comic gets like this censorship, safety approval, approved by the Comics Code. Is that what it is? A Comics Code, right? Authority, right? So, if there's anything wrong with the book, you don't see that on this one, do you? There's no code. There's no code.
That means there's something in that comic that this authority object to, right?
And that particular subject of what they're objecting to is drug use.
Drug use, yeah, drug addiction. So basically what's happening here is, some of you may remember, Harry Osborn was kind of dating Mary Jane at the time.
Yeah.
But she was really always more interested in Peter Parker, right?
And
so she was kind of,
And Harry senses that vibe.
Yeah.
And thinks that if Peter's trying to steal her from him,
even though he's with Gwen Stacy, right? But
yeah, so
Harry starts hanging out with these guys who, of course, have all
from the wrong side of town,
LSD and heroin and all this kind of stuff,
which was all popular stuff in the late '60s with the music and everything, and the way the '60s with the '60s were a turbulent decade with the Vietnam War, and the hippie movement with drug use and the free love and Woodstock and.
So Harry gets hooked on drugs, and he goes to the hospital. He almost ODs. And, again, pretty tame by today's standards, because in the book, it looks like he's only taken the drugs a couple times. But
they're not showing, needles in the arm and blood spilling.
But amidst all this happening, of course, guess who's back in town? Harry's father, the Green Goblin, right? So Spidey, at this time, already knows that Norman Osborn is the Green Goblin, tries to get in touch with him while he's the Goblin to say, hey, your son's in the hospital, he's really sick. And that's kind of the way that he gets him out of this whole Green Goblin state in the end. But still, the fact that they dealt with this whole drug addiction.
And this is the next part of the three-part story right here. Again, another great cover. Doesn't look like his fingers are sticking to that wall, does it? He's lost his powers. And... again, no comic approval code.
Yep.
And this is probably, what, 19... This is number 98, so we're looking at, what, maybe 1968, probably?
68 or 69.
68 or 69.
Yeah.
And, again, a great cover. And to wrap up our pre-100 issues, this is from my collection. This is what Spider-Man 100 looks like, but this is Marvel Tales, which was reprinted. This is probably from 1980. But this is what issue 100 looks like, but it's actually black background, not yellow.
Yep.
So, but this is the exact same story that happened in issue 100 of Spider-Man. And that pretty much concludes our first Spider-Man episode here on Comic Book Geezers. And of course, in traditional fashion, we're going to end it with favorite covers. So I'm going to pick two from Pete's pile. I'm going to go back to the Prowler again. This is another part of that story that we just showed. Again, another great cover. I like the little wrist rockets.
Yeah, very cool
on
costume.
On the Prowler. Again, great artwork. The animation is just beautiful, and the colors pop, which is what I like about it.
Johnny Ring-a-Ding Romita.
And then there's another one here. That was issue 78, and this is issue 88. Again, the classic villain, Dr. Octopus. But what's great about this, you don't see Dr. Octopus here. You just see his tentacles fighting Spider-Man. And they're doing pretty good just by themselves. They know that they hate Spider-Man. Again, a great cover.
Doc was actually in prison, and they had him and his tentacles totally separate, like hundreds of miles apart. But while he's in prison, he worked up his brain waves so well that he was able to actually
mentally do
the telepathy thing with the tentacles. And the tentacles broke out of where tentacles were, came and got him, but on the way,
Spider-Man was in the way.
Yeah. So, you know how
that wraps up my favorite covers. Cool. Kick it over to Pete.
So one of my favorites here, I always love this cover, and I love the issue, and I love the...
It's a great villain, which we already talked about.
Number 64.
The Vulture.
They actually have this in a shirt right now, made by the same company that makes this one. I almost bought it.
Cool.
I probably will.
On your list of things to do, on your bucket list?
And Bill talked earlier on about, he asked me what was one of my first ever Spider-Man issues that I bought
that he bought when he was a kid?
Here's one of them. In fact, this might actually be the one. This is number 69. This is original. Bought this in New York City. I used to, just a quick little story, so I used to go visit my grandparents a lot. We lived on the Lower East Side of New York City, and they had this great little newsstand right around the corner that sold a ton of comics. So whenever I would go there, my grandfather or grandmother would take me down there, and I would spend some of my allowance money. So, 12 cents?
Yeah.
So there you have it.
Not bad when you were getting a quarter when you were a kid. It was a big deal. Now you can't even.
I was a little kid.
You can't even cross a bridge with a quarter anymore. No. Can't do anything. So anyway, that wraps up this edition of our first Spider-Man episode on Comic Book Geezers. I'm Wild Bill saying thanks for being here.
And I'm Pete. Join us in a couple days because we've got issues.
We're going to do post 100.
101 to 200.
Yeah, we're going to do 101 to 200.
And as if you thought this was good, there's a lot of good stuff coming.
So that's the problem we have. What do we want to pick? Because I'd like to do them all, but we time is our enemy. So as usual. All right, gang. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching.
See you next time.
Take care.